Isn't that a pretty red? And I took this last fall just outside. And of course, none of that is here right now. But anyway, let's move on to um, anxiety protocol. I've had enough requests for this, and I've made several of them, and they keep disappearing. So, how to deal with anxiety. So, let's look first off, there's two kinds. One is probably what 99.9% of us have, and that's just anxiety. And one day I decided I was going to really get down to the brass tacks of this anxiety because I had it. And so I went to the Mayo Clinic. When I really want medical information, I go to the Mayo Clinic and or Cleveland Clinic. So I went to both of them. And guess what I found? That very little anxiety is actually pathological. But that means that all the time, every day, all day, because there's something disordered in here. For the rest of us, anxiety is a combination of two things: fear and worry. Huh, who knew? And I learned this because I had anxiety about 21/7. And essentially, those 3 hours of sleep I did get was because I was exhausted and would fall asleep. I'm still curious a little bit about how that happened, but in my particular healing journey, I did not start out with a real high degree of regulation. So my suspicion is that was it. I was not paying attention to regulating myself, and it was the upshot. In terms of neurological, I'm going to add this picture here. All right. And we can see that you see that, and you can zoom in on this, but there's social engagement, fight, flight, and freeze. The process, and you see on the far right there, it says deactivation. That's what I teach people how to do. Basically, it gets you out of freeze into fight, flight, not as a temporary thing. You learn to live in social engagement because the human organism is geared towards that. That's home. If we're wired for home, that's it. So you can see where anxiety is over on fight, flight here. I put a circle around those emotions. And I did that because they're primary emotions of fight or flight. And I am not quite yet certain, but I'm leaning towards thinking that these are the default emotions of fight or flight because they probably, in a way, help us survive. And so I had this anxiety, and I was pretty much crippled by it. And so one day I started to think about going on medication. That didn't work out so good for me. I decided to stay with. I didn't decide. I decided to not go on medication. I was going to try to beat this on my own. That worked out for me. Thank you. I'm grateful for that. And the way I did that, as an EMT here, I was suffering with this stuff, and I thought I go to these kind of calls with people having panic attacks and anxiety and all that kind of stuff frequently enough where I knew what to do. I also knew what not to do. Anyway, the protocol I developed is as follows, and I don't have it written down. I probably could write it down. The first and foremost thing is you're going to probably find yourself doing this kind of thing. So we're going to deal with two things, two sides of this. We'll do the worry side later, and we're going to do right now the fear side, because in the image here, this is where anxiety is up here in fight flight. So you're dealing with some fear elements. And if you study the neurophysiological reaction of the human organism to a threat, this is what it creates. And this is just the emotion part of it. There's a little bit more over here. Your entire being is altered, your hormones, your heart rate, your breathing rate, and all of the stuff that change autonomically, there's only one that you can change by willpower or by control, by motor exercise. Call it what you will. And that's what we're going to talk about right here. So when you're feeling your anxiety, first thing to do is start breathing. And the protocol for that, it's a protocol within a protocol. The technique for that is an inhalation, and you want it to be full. Not real, that might have been too fast, but let's say to count of 2 or 3. Extend that belly, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. The exhale, count of 6, 7, or 8. All right. So it's now I'm doing this because I want you to see how my mouth is. Like I'm blowing out candles. All right. There was a reason for that. Okay. So let's look at the inhale activates the fight flight system. The exhale activates the social engagement system. So what I'm doing when I inhale and I'm filling up, now I really do want, because if you're in chronic fight flight, your diaphragm could be real tight, and that's a problem. And so if it helps at all, lay down on the ground, put a book or 2 or 3 on your belly, and then breathe in a way that you feel the book go. You make the book go up. You can't see this here, but that's what I'm doing. And you might also feel your upper chest expand a little bit, because your ribs will expand and your back will push you up just a little bit. That's when you know you're doing diaphragmatic breathing. But for some of us, that was, anyway, that can be a problem. If that is, you have my email address right there on the screen. Email me. We'll talk about that, because that's part of that relaxation process of the work that I teach people, is helps that relax so that you can actually take a deep breath, which increases the oxygenation of your blood. And I could go into the details on that. I don't need to do that here. Take a full breath. And then when you're exhaling, it's like blowing out the candles. What that's doing is it's beginning to energize some of the vagus nerves that are in the face. These are some of the first ones to respond to the, let me see if I can get that. All right. We'll look at this one. All right. So these are all the things that when your brain says threat, this is what happens, some of what happens to you physiologically. Now look at that face. Zoom in on that and look at that face. Ooh. You think there's some changes here? Ears, eyes, jaw. I mean, there's a look of fight and or flight in that face. Those change within milliseconds, that changing. Yeah, that's how fast that happens. When you go into fight or flight, all of that stuff changes. Okay, so that's what happens. And so we're starting here with the face to now, just in the few that I've done, that was the one breath that I started to feel the physiological response. Does that make sense? You will feel it. But when anxiety is up, that's what I would do. I would sometimes go out, stand outside, because sometimes the house felt too crowded, and sometimes I'd have to go for a walk. But I did this as often as I needed to throughout the day, because at the time I was unemployable anyway. So I had the time. And if you're in those same shoes, this would be a way to make you employable again when you don't have this anxiety. But I did this quite regularly for several weeks. So Just inhale and exhale. Exercise number 1. All right. Exercise number 2 is orienting. And sometimes I call this grounding. If you want to stand outside in your bare feet and get that electron exchange, that's probably not a bad idea. We could talk more about grounding some other time. For the most part right now, it's just simply a matter of inhale and exhale. Now I want you to orient. So I am going to remove this. And so this is what I used to do for a patient in the field. If they're freaking out, I'd say, okay, I want you to look around the room and find 3 things that are red. And as you can tell, right up there on the top shelf, there's at least 3 just on that shelf alone. Yeah, maybe a couple down here on this one, a couple right here. You might want to count that one. See what I'm saying? So then blue or green, and see what happens here, because what you want them to do is a little bit of this, nice and slow, and a little bit of their eye movements, just to get their muscles, again, the vagus nerves, to be moving around. Start creating a little relaxation, putting themselves back into the here and the now. Because if you say blue things and they say, oh, right outside the window there, the leaves on the tree, you have a medical problem. This is not your standard anxiety. Okay, so there's the green, and they might actually get creative with this because there's starting to be a shift in the nervous system, because you slowed the heart rate, you slow the breathing rate. Do that as long as you need to until you feel that physiological shift. And then you start to orient them. Okay, what's your name? What's today's date? What year is it, maybe? Who's the president? And I had one old gal, I was on a call, and she had had a physiological episode, but she was in pretty good standing, and I went through all the questions with her. And I said, the paramedic's going to show up. He's got more authority than I do. So he's going to ask you all the same questions, just so you know. So he did. Last question, who's the president? She looked up over his shoulder and winked at me. And she said, I think his name is Lincoln. So she was perfect. And I was back there chuckling. But that's the orientation side of things, is putting yourself back in the here and now, and then actually saying, okay, what can I do about, do I feel things? Do I sense things? Are you cold? Are you hot? So if it's a night like over in the Far East today, not the Far East, but the Far East of the US, it's pretty darn hot. So if you were over in that situation and somebody said, what's the air temperature feel like? And they said, ooh, I'm cold. You still might have somewhat of a physiological issue going on. And that begins to tell me that maybe this is deeper than just anxiety. So you're breathing and you're orienting. Well, you know what that means? This is online and functioning for the most part. And humor, oh boy, someone can pull off humor in that. That's a great sign, because that is a higher brain function. And so it's very, very good. Anyway, the other side of dealing with anxiety is Byron Katie's 4 questions. And those are pretty amazing. I will look those up for you. And when I looked up what worry, I just thought, okay, can't be all that difficult. But that's all right. So worry and fear. We're dealing with the fear side with the breathing and the reorienting, coming back to the here and now. Part of the here and now is because of the fear side typically has to do with what we're doing with the the ruminations of our mind. We might fear the landlord coming over and him kicking us out, and he completely pulls the rug out from underneath us. Says, what can I do to help? Okay, cool, that kind of thing. So, but we have this worry. We worry about a lot. Before I started to heal, I had a lot of worries, and it's frustrating. But what I discovered about some of my worries was, oh, how I partly want to say what a waste of time it is. And here's why. Here's 4 questions to ask about your worries. Whatever it is you're worried about. Is what you're worried about true? Well, you might say yes. A lot of people who are convinced of spiritual matters and political matters are going to immediately say yes, when the clue is 99% of the time it's a no. All right. Is it true? Yes. Can you absolutely know that it's true? And there's the rub. All right. If you cannot absolutely know that it's true, okay, maybe what I'm worried about isn't a reality. 3, how do you react when you believe that thought? All right. I'm worried. That's no fun. Now, if I believe the thought, okay, well, maybe it's not true. What changes in my emotions? That's powerful. Who would you be without that thought? If this thought, this worry that you're focusing on or ruminating on, who would you be without that? And as you take that worry and run it through this grid, you will be amazed at what it does for your emotional construct. It can change it radically. Because if you can't know that it's absolutely true, why are you bothering to think about this? All right. It's an old saying, and some say it's an old Buddhist thing, but I don't know about that. Anything you're worrying about, can you change it? Then you have something to do. Problem solved. Can't change it? You got nothing to do. Problem solved. Why do I worry about things I can't change? Work on things I can change. All right. I don't have any reason to actually worry. And in that particular vein, then, as you begin this breathing exercise and you're doing this, you're orienting yourself to the here and now, then you're starting to deal with your thoughts. Okay, that's cool. You will find that your anxiety will ratchet down as you move from these higher states of, so we're going to go back to this drawing here. As you approach, yes, it's July 4th. It's my brothers and sisters. As you approach the free state, that's, you got low levels of fight or flight, or you got high levels or mid levels. The higher you go, the more intense this feeling, and finally, then you will shut down. And if you live that way, that's what that free state is. That's how life will be almost all the time. As you begin to downregulate, and that means you kind of turn the volume knob down on the intensity of these states. You begin to breathe a little bit more, you begin to relax a little bit more, you begin to realize that, man, I bend myself out of shape. Okay, I'll confess here, about the dumbest shit. That's right. A lot of what we spend our mental energy ruminating on is nothing we can change, and stupid as the day is long. So put those 2 exercises together and then get outside. I bet I was taking, I was unemployed and unemployable at the time. So done out breathing a lot and outside and breathing the air and seeing the trees and stuff like that. And it took several weeks to do that. Now, as I said, there's a deactivation phase over here. that deactivation phase is not the anxiety protocol, because we're talking about the autonomic nervous system response to threat. And that's what this image here is demonstrating. And so when the amygdala of the brain says threat, whether that's perceived or actual, this is what happens to our neurophysiology. This guy. That's what happens. And all I'm trying to do with this protocol, because I didn't know this at the time, all I knew is I couldn't live with this anxiety. Well, that's not true. Okay, so I was learning this along the way, and I had been taught how to tremor. What tremor does is it takes us out of fight, flight into social engagement. That is your body's evolutionary response to the threat response. See, all of this stuff happens, and this guy or this gal, doesn't matter, relatively the same. The sexual organs and that neurology changes a little bit. There's differences there. For the most part, though, we can call that reproductive. It gets shut down. This is what ends up happening, and this is an autonomic switch. The threat, boom, this happens autonomically. And this deactivation phase over on the right side of the picture is this breathing, the reset of the diaphragm. If you go to my website at raiseyourresilience.com, there's a video on it, and it's an antelope I think it's a leopard, not a cheetah. If there's a black line on it down by its eyes to its nose, that's a cheetah. Otherwise, it's a leopard. And you'll see all of this. It's pretty amazing. The breathing reset and the tremoring, and that is what deactivates this cycle so that this gets shuffled out of your body. Tremoring didn't help with my anxiety. Believe that or not. I'd already piled on a whole bunch of tremoring, and now my body was I wasn't paying attention to the signals of my body. So I was probably in a state of freeze, came down on the fight flight, and what's way up there at the top of intense fight flight? Anxiety. Yeah. Woohoo. I needed to regulate that process a little better. It was one of my greater lessons on regulating and on doing this work with somebody, because I was doing it by myself. That was a mistake. Anyway, I created this protocol just to deal with the anxiety, which finally ended up being probably, like I said, several weeks. So it might have been upwards of a couple months of pretty intensely working on this stuff. And okay, and maybe if you're lucky enough to be able to still work, kudos. It's going to be a bit more of a challenge for you, but I think it'll work. Now, the tremoring part, what that does is foundationally changes my nervous system to take me out of fight flight. And that's why I say do this with somebody else because I was doing 15 minutes every other day, and I shouldn't have been. And finally, my anxiety popped up because it was already there anyway. And there could have been some underlying factors like being unemployed, being unemployable, blah, blah, blah. And so I have all of this stuff kind of going on inside here in my nervous system, and I'm jazzballed. And the tremoring helps. It turns a rather boisterous tide. If you've ever been down on the ocean shores or Ruby Beach up in the west side of Washington, when it's been stormy and rainy, yeah, I once took a vacation, and that's what I walked out in. It was astounding in its own way, amazingly beautiful in its own way. However, there are beautiful days when you can get out on the water and that, and then that the gravel. Oh man, sunshine, and I didn't have any of that day. I did not. So it's this nervous system change that tremoring makes, and the tremoring is what made it possible to not have anxiety since then. I instituted this protocol. Sometimes listening to music helped, but for the most part, it was the breathing, the orienting, myself, my day, my temperature, being the here and now, and then dealing with my worry. Is it true? Do you know that it's absolutely true? If you took this into a court of law, would a defense lawyer poke a million holes in it so your little true boat sank? Okay, there is that. And wow, what would it be like if I didn't have to live with this thought? How would it feel if I didn't have this thought? Wow, way, woohoo! So, and that's where the trauma ring takes us. But don't do this on your own. Do the protocol. You can do that on your own. But when you get down to those deeper stages of needing the healing, get a hold of me. All right. Anyway, there you have it. I will talk to you all later. And I will pass this on to the people that really asked for it. Okay. Bye.